Welcome. We are here to explore the intersection of law, culture, and personal stories. Today, we are diving into a critical topic: how Canadian migration laws and policies impact the LGBTQIA+ refugee community. I am Shri, and this is my co-host Sydney.
Hi, everyone.
We are UBC Okanagan students in Anthropology 418, Travel Migration, and the Politics of Mobility. And we are here today to review and share our thoughts on both the legal framework and the cultural implications, highlighting how these policies affect real lives. It's essential to understand that while laws shape the landscape, personal experiences bring these issues to life. So, a little bit about myself and position on this topic. I am a psychology major and an international student here in Canada. I acknowledge my privilege and wanted to explore the experiences of those who migrate without such advantages, especially individuals who face serious threats in their home countries due to their sexual orientation.
Yes, and I'm actually a health and exercise science major here at the University of British Columbia in Kelowna, BC. And although I am a Canadian resident, I was born here and raised here my whole life. I think it is important to be informed in these topics, especially within my own country of residence. So I look forward to this discussion, especially since Shri and I have different backgrounds, so hopefully we can raise some thought-provoking ideas as we navigate this topic from a different lens. We would also like to note that we will be referencing several papers and a film throughout the course of this podcast. We have attached the link for these resources below in the show notes for your convenience, so feel free to pause at any time to review those for any confusion or for any further information. Thank you for being here, and we hope you enjoyed the discussion.
Okay, so let's get into it now. Canada's resettlement programs for LGBTQIA+ refugees are a critical lifeline for those persecuted because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or sex characteristics, also known as SOGIs.
Absolutely. Let's start with how LGBTQIA+ refugees are identified or referred to in Canada. This can happen through organizations like the United Nations Refugee Agency, the Rainbow Road, or other referral organizations or private sponsors. We will be discussing the Rainbow Railroad organization further throughout this discussion here.
LGBTQIA+ refugees come to Canada through a variety of pathways, including the government-assisted refugee program, the private sponsorship of refugee program, and the blended visa office referred program. Each of these programs provides essential support to help refugees settle and thrive in their new home.
So let's break these down. First, the Government Assist Refugee Program. Through this program, LGBTQIA+ refugees are referred by the organizations like the Rainbow Railroad. Refugees resettled under this program receive 12 months of income and settlement support through the Resettlement Assist Program. Beyond resettlement, Canada is working to improve the experience of queer refugee newcomers. For instance, the National Network of Enhancing LGBTQIA Refugee Sponsorship was launched to develop resources, training, and tools aimed at better supporting these newcomers.
And the support doesn't stop there. According to the Government of Canada, Canada funds over 500 settlement service provider organizations to help newcomers integrate. These services include language training, job search assistance, community connections, and even childcare and transportation for refugees accessing these programs.
These refugees also benefit from specific supports such as short-term counseling and orientation tailored to their needs. And for in-Canada asylum seekers, guidelines established by the Immigration and Refugee Board promote a better understanding of cases involving SOGI applicants.
Yeah, it is important to recognize the complexity of SOGI claims and to add to that. Since November 2020, in Canada, refugee claimants can change the sex or gender identifier on their refugee protection claimant document. This small change makes a big difference for those seeking recognition and respect in their new environment.
Right? And I personally think it's important that these small changes are being made to help claimants be accepted, but also give them more autonomy in their transition to Canada.
Now that we have introduced you to Canada's resettlement programs, let's talk about the Immigration and Refugee Board's Guideline 9 from the first Immigration Review article. This guideline is better known as the SOGI guideline. It's been in effect since May 2017 and addresses asylum claims based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. This guideline takes on some of the thorniest issues that asylum seekers face when their claims are tied to SOGI.
So let's start with why this guideline is necessary to discuss. For decades, individuals seeking asylum based on their SOGI have faced systemic challenges. According to David Murray's article, Liberation Nation, if the applicant fails to reveal their SOGI identity right off the bat, then it can often lead to denied international protection or even forced deportation. More barriers include being judged against harmful stereotypes, questioned about their abilities to live discreetly, or asked for deeply personal and sometimes inappropriate evidence. But one thing it does do is it recognizes the fears faced by the family members of SOGI asylum seekers. This is crucial acknowledgement since persecution often extends to those associated with individuals who don't conform to societal norms.
Another highlight is its stance on discretion. The guideline firmly states that asylum seekers shouldn't be expected to live discreetly about their SOGI to avoid persecution. This is a direct challenge to older practices in countries like the UK, where decision makers would ask if applicants could live quietly and safely in their home countries.
Right? And discretion isn't a solution, it's a denial of identity. The guideline recognizes that forcing someone to conceal their SOGI is itself a violation of their fundamental human rights.
Yes, and speaking of rights, let's talk about stereotypes. Just like in the Liberation Nation article, the guideline takes a strong position against using stereotypes in asylum decisions. For example, it warns decision makers against assuming that all SOGI claimants will participate in LGBTQ+ culture in Canada.
This is a really important point. Too often, decisions have relied on narrow, harmful ideas of what a real SOGI person looks like or acts like. The guideline encourages a broader and more nuanced understanding.
And it doesn't stop there. It also addresses late disclosure, stating that delays in revealing one's SOGI can be reasonable. This is a big deal because cultural, psychological, and societal barriers often prevent asylum seekers from sharing their stories immediately.
That's true. The guideline urges decision makers to be cautious when interpreting inconsistencies in an applicant's narrative. This acknowledges that late disclosures doesn't necessarily mean dishonesty. It often reflects that immense stigma and fear in these individuals face.
The guideline also addresses the role of country of origin information, or COI. It warns against assuming that underreported discriminatory practices mean they don't exist.
This is so important because COI often reflects the biases of society it's reporting on. The guideline urges decision makers to interpret such information critically, especially when it comes to cultures with deeply entrenched stigma against SOGI individuals.
I find that the categorization towards these refugees are quite demoralizing, as this makes the refugees have to perform to get their place in Canada.
Right? So just to explain, consider how we've socially constructed these categories of race. And by doing this, we've made it possible to allocate power and control to specific color groups. So that is a very similar way to look at this guideline. This just gives the refugees like another hoop they have to jump through when they're entering into Canada. And also to add to that, I find the laws that discriminate homosexuality are inherently oppressive and discriminatory. By not fully acknowledging this, the guideline leaves room for denying asylum claims from people living under these oppressive regimes.
But there are other elements that deserve praise, like the use of the term expressions alongside sexual orientation and gender identity. This shift in terminology broadens the focus to individual characteristics rather than just predefined categories like LGBTQIA+.
And that inclusivity extends to acknowledging that gender isn't binary. The guideline emphasizes that SOGI exists on a spectrum, which is critical for ensuring that decision makers respect individuals' diverse identities.
Yeah, and it even highlights how SOGI intersects with other characteristics like race, ethnicity, age, disability, and social class. This intersectionality is a standout feature and recognizes the complexity of asylum seekers' experiences. Before we wrap up this overview on the guideline, we need to address its shortcomings. One significant issue is its stance on sexualized evidence. While it discourages requiring sexually explicit material to prove one's SOGI, it doesn't ban this practice outright. And while the guideline's terminology is generally progressive, phrases like diverse SOGI could be rethought. I believe that this wording risks reinforcing a divide between heterosexuality and non-heterosexuality, which isn't helpful.
Yeah, I think so too. As we discussed in class, for these individuals who are fleeing prosecution, the journey begins long before they step foot in Canada. In many countries, being openly LGBTQ+ is punishable by imprisonment, violence, or even death. The United Nations estimates that over 70 countries criminalize same-sex relationships, with many imposing harsh penalties. Uganda is one such example, where laws and societal attitudes make life unbearable for LGBTQ individuals. Drake, the protagonist in the documentary Someone Like Me, fled Uganda to escape these life-threatening conditions. His story highlights the harrowing decisions many must make, leaving their family, friends, and everything familiar for the hope of safety.
Drake's story is a vivid example of the intense fear and trauma LGBTQ+ individuals face in countries where homosexuality is criminalized. In Someone Like Me, we see how Drake's life in Uganda was shaped by a constant sense of danger. In one of the film's key scenes, Drake recalls an instance when his identity was exposed to the community. He describes how his community turned on him, making him fear for his life.
Right? That moment in the film is especially powerful. Drake had to abandon his family and leave everything he knew behind, knowing that if he stayed, he would face not only legal repercussions, but also social and physical violence. He described in the documentary how it felt to leave Uganda, saying, "Leaving was a relief, but it also felt like I was dying inside. I had to leave the people I loved, even though they didn't understand me."
Exactly. It wasn't just the legal threat. It was the emotional toll of leaving behind loved ones who couldn't or wouldn't accept him. And that's a key theme in Someone Like Me, the emotional and psychological cost of being forced to hide who you are. Drake had to choose between the safety of a new life in Canada and the connection to his roots.
What's remarkable about the
But
documentary is it captures his journey after fleeing Uganda. When Drake arrives in Canada, he finds safety, but faces a new set of challenges, navigating the asylum process, dealing with isolation, and adjusting to the completely new culture. Even though he was safe from physical harm, the mental health toll from his previous life still loomed large. In one poignant scene, he meets with the Rainbow Refugee Group, a nonprofit that helps the LGBTQ asylum seekers find sponsors, and opens up about his feelings of guilt and confusion about leaving his home.
Yeah, that moment in the documentary is so important. It shows that even in safety, the trauma of past persecution can weigh heavily on someone's mind. Drake's story isn't just about escaping violence. It's about dealing with the emotional aftermath, trying to rebuild a sense of identity and community in a new, unfamiliar place. However, this group became a problem in itself when they differed on expectations of Drake's behavior and lifestyle choices. This is problematic in groups like this because they are the main support system for LGBTQ refugees that come to Canada.
Absolutely. In our own views, these groups play a crucial role in the landscape as they often are the first point of contact for the immigrants navigating the system like healthcare, housing, and social services. Their attitudes can significantly influence the kind of support that immigrants receive. And unfortunately, although most social workers reject harmful stereotypes about immigrants, like the idea that they increase crime or burdens to the healthcare system, a majority still hold these beliefs today. And if you would believe that even a small pocket of these biases can have real consequences, like imagine a social worker who subconsciously views certain immigrants as less deserving. That bias could influence how they allocate resources or even advocate for their clients.
It's a reminder of how critical self-awareness is in this profession. But it's not just about individual beliefs. The study also highlighted how systematic barriers shape perceptions. For instance, according to Buan Canadian policies, often favors certain groups like permanent residents or refugees while marginalizing others, such as temporary or non-status immigrants.
Exactly. These policies create a hierarchy of deservingness, which can seep into social work practice. The study found that many social workers viewed permanent residents and refugees as more deserving of services than temporary or non-status immigrants.
That's deeply concerning, especially when you consider that temporary and non-status immigrants are among the most vulnerable. They often face exploitation, housing instability, and limited access to healthcare, challenges that have only worsened during the COVID-19 pandemic as seen in the film.
Yeah, I think so too. Social workers who have received training on immigration policy and structural inequality are probably less likely to hold biases.
Bhuvan suggests that incorporating immigration content into social work education could make a big difference. Imagine a curriculum that doesn't just focus on cultural competency, but also dwells into power dynamics, systematic racism, and the structural factors shaping immigrant experiences.
Yes, and that's where a rights-based participatory framework could come in. This approach, as some scholars advocate, shifts the focus from individual immigrants to the broader systems that exploit immigration labor while denying them equal rights.
Let's talk about perceptions of deservingness in more detail. This concept is deeply tied to how we categorize immigrants. Permanent residents and refugees are often seen as more deserving of services, possibly because they're perceived as having earned their place in Canada.
Meanwhile, temporary and non-status immigrants are frequently viewed as less deserving. This perception isn't just about individual bias, it reflects the systemic inequalities.
It's disheartening but not surprising. These perceptions mirror broader societal attitudes and policies which often prioritize economic contributions over human rights. According to the Government of Canada, some asylum cases suggests that a person could avoid persecution by relocating to a different part of their home country. However, for SOGI's individuals, it's a well-established in law that an international flight alternative isn't viable if the person would need to hide their identity to live safely. Imagine being forced to conceal who you are, your love, your gender, your very identity just to survive. That's not safety. That's suppression.
Exactly. And there are also practical challenges with the IFA and SOGI individuals. Securing housing and employment, accessing medical care like HIV treatment or gender-affirming procedures, or even finding basic social support might be virtually impossible in many places. These realities make it clear for many SOGI individuals, an IFA just isn't a reasonable solution. So I hope that the listeners that have stayed with us so far can understand how important policies play in changing the lives of people. Although Canada is remarkable at supporting refugees that are in danger of being harmed by their own home, there are still many actions that Canada can take to improve.
Yes, I agree. And I think it's great to see positive changes being made to the legal policies that SOGI individuals face regularly. So for a final remark, we'd like to pose a question to our listeners. Do you agree with the changes that have been made for SOGI individuals so far? And what more would you like to see change?
Yes, we'd love to hear from you. So post your answers in the comments below and we'll bring them up in our next episode.
Thank you for joining us today as we navigated the complex landscape of Canadian migration laws and their profound impact on the LGBTQIA+ refugee community.
We've explored the critical pathways that allow individuals fleeing persecution to find safety in Canada, as well as the legal frameworks that aim to protect their rights. But as we've seen, laws alone cannot capture the full spectrum of human experience.
Indeed, the personal stories we have shared, like that of Drake, remind us that behind every statistic and policy, there are real lives filled with hope, struggle, and resilience.
Thank you for being a part of this important conversation. Until next time, let's keep the dialogue going and work towards a world where everyone can live authentically and safely.
Yeah, thank you. Take care, everyone.